Welcome to the Business Growth Spotlight, where we shine the light and talk with business leaders from all over the world who are here sharing their expertise and wisdom so we can all grow together. I'm your host, co-founder of HLH Growth Solutions, where we help businesses grow through innovative visibility and automation strategies. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm really excited to have you here. You're in for a treat today. We're about to have a fun conversation, all about presentations, and I'm excited about this conversation because we haven't had this conversation on this podcast, and it's a key piece of your communication effectiveness and also to your business growth. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest, Mark Bourgeois with Oratium, to the podcast. So welcome, Mark, to the show.
Thank you very much, Heidi, and congratulations on pronouncing two hard names correctly. We were just talking about that. It's a hard couplet to get right. So you're off to a good start.
Oh, I'm very excited. I'm 2 for 2 right now, and I held it together. I don't know that I'll try that again, but I'm glad I said it correctly. So Mark, I'm just going to give everybody a little background about you, and then we're just going to dive right in. Sound good?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So Mark has delivered thousands of presentations and now leads teams who teach, consult, and coach using methods developed by Oratium. Additionally, he leads teams responsible for revenue development, for operations, and for product development and management. Mark's background spans journalism, consulting, finance, and public service. He holds a master's in public and private management from Yale and a bachelor's from Tulane. He's also a husband and father of 3. So Mark, thank you for the very precise, condensed bio. Sometimes I get these really long ones and I need to break it down. So thank you for that, because that helps me a lot.
You're welcome, Heidi. And I'm trying to actually serve your audience, right? Because nobody really wants to hear all the David Copperfield kind of stuff, as Holden Caulfield put it in Catcher in the Rye. And furthermore, when we work with clients, one of the big things that we focus on around presentations is, okay, well, let's get all the stuff about you out and let's start talking about our audience, because that's who they're there for, right? They're not here to listen to some corporate history or, the long and winding path of how you got to the position you're in. They're there to find out what they can learn, and hopefully you can, as presenter, help them solve some of their problems.
Absolutely. People don't want to hear about us all the time. They want to hear about, people don't care about what you know until they know that you care, right?
Exactly.
There's a saying around there.
Yep.
So Mark, can you tell us about Oratium, who you help, and what inspired you to focus your business on helping leaders become more effective communicators and presenters?
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. Well, I'll go back to actually a couple of decades ago, maybe even more, where a few of us worked at a company that produced syndicated research, right? These big, huge studies that tackled really meaty business issues. It could have been for the chief sales officer or industry focus, like, consumer banking. But what we had to do was we had to take those huge studies and then we had to boil them down for presentations. We had to actually communicate in an oral environment in these executive meetings that we would have. And so people were always coming up, attendees, and saying, hey, can you teach me how to do that? And we'd say, well, we just did. We went through the challenge that you're facing and case studies for how, and they're like, no. Can you teach us how to do what you just did, to take that big presentation and turn it into something that we actually understood? And, at some point when you hear the same question enough times, you start to think, wow, that could be a business. And that's how we got started. Just trying to help people, clients, understand why things were going wrong in their presentations, and more importantly, how to fix them, how to make their presentations compelling, interesting, and audience-centric. And so that's our story. We focus on presentations, be they sales presentations, general business, could be in nonprofits. You could be trying to raise money with an investor, get a sale done. You could be communicating a strategy to your business or trying to get the board to approve some funding, whatever it is, but it's just around those conversations, those presentations. And what we do to help our clients achieve those aims is we provide training in a methodology. Then we provide consulting to help them use that to actually design the presentations, and then coaching to help them deliver or execute. So it's not a complicated business model. I mean, it's very challenging sometimes to sort, all of these decks out but at the same time, it doesn't have a lot of moving parts. Very straightforward.
And I love that you basically shared that you saw a pain point and a gap in the market and you stepped in and go, we can fill this and we can
It's
help.
amazing. I mean, it's a problem everybody has. I mean,
Mhm.
if you think about a conference you've been to recently, an internal meeting, if you're on the receiving end of a sales pitch, and how many of those have you experienced where they're just awful? I mean, to be honest, right? You walk out and you're like, wow, that's an hour of my life I'm never going to get back. So it's this problem that everybody has, and yet what was amazing was nobody was really tackling that.
Mhm.
Nobody was really going right at the heart. I think for a long time people didn't see that as a business, perhaps because I think a lot of us have just learned to accept that. It's like this low cultural bar, you
Yeah.
know, which is really incredible, and yet it's a problem everybody has, and coupled with that is I think most people they know they should fix it, but they don't know how, right?
Right.
So they're aware of it.
So, Mark, we've all sat through presentations that were forgettable, or completely downright painful. Why do you think so many business presentations miss the mark? And what are the biggest mistakes people make before they even step on stage?
It's funny. That saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I mean,
Mm.
nobody ever sets out to give a bad presentation, right? So I think the deep heart of the issue is our instincts as speakers, presenters, designers just lead us to some very bad places. We assume we have more time than we have. We assume that the audience has more mental capacity or bandwidth than they actually do. It turns out the brain is not very strong at processing information in real time in a spoken word environment. And so we end up just packing way too much stuff in. Our instincts tell us that what is important to us is important to the audience. And that's rarely the case, right? And so we get this problem of sender-centricity, right? So there are all these issues, but I'll start with design, right? I mean, I think that the fundamental instinct, if there's one big sort of assumption or instinct where people it really does them wrong, it's the belief that, some great delivery is going to overcome poorly designed presentations. And that's not the case, just the opposite. If you can craft a well-designed story, even if you don't tell it all that well, you're going to be far more effective as a presenter than if you have a bad story and an excellent delivery, right? People will forget it. They will forget it. They won't remember it. They'll get confused. But hey, you'll entertain them. And so they'll think they had a good time too, even though you get absolutely nothing you'd hope for out of that presentation as a
Mm.
speaker.
Mm. So many of us are, can you tell us what leads to, and maybe you just shared it, but what leads to death by PowerPoint? Because a lot of us, when we do presentations, we tend to use slides if you're
Yeah.
virtual, or you'll do a deck when you're actually on stage, or a PowerPoint. When is too much,
Yeah.
and when does it become ineffective?
So there's nothing wrong with PowerPoint. Actually, we have a reputation as being anti-PowerPoint. It's totally not true. We build our materials in PowerPoint. We work with clients to build their presentations in PowerPoint. We like to describe PowerPoint as tequila. It's morally neutral,
Mhm.
but it leads you to do some really crazy things. So, where do we go wrong? So we go wrong in three big ways. The first is too much information. We just pack too much in. So the first thing that we work with clients on is how to reduce quantity. Just simplify it. The second issue is around it's often very confusing. And so what we mean by that is two things. First, there's no clear story. The slides just jump from one sort of topic to another. And the way to test this, the next time that you're actually at a conference or just in any kind of presentation, close your eyes and try to picture the slide that came before the one that the speaker's discussing now. You can't do it because there's no connection. And the human brain needs that connection. It needs story. And without story, people just get lost. The other way it's confusing is that there's often a lot of technical jargon.
Yes.
Just stuff, terms that you assume as a speaker your audience understands, and they don't. Or worse, they come to a different conclusion or a different interpretation. That's really true with abbreviations and acronyms.
Mm.
I'll tell you a story I love to tell. So I'm in Northern Virginia. I work in Langley, Virginia, which has a certain meaning to a lot of people. There's a certain agency with the federal government of the United States in Langley, Virginia. I do not work for that agency. But I was at a party recently. I was talking to a chef, a professional chef, and I said, "Well, how'd you get into, this line of work?" And he said, "Well, it started with the CIA." And he started going on about how he was with the CIA or at the CIA, and then this and this and this, and eventually he opened up his first restaurant. I'm sitting there going, like, were you working in the cafeteria? What was the? And then finally it hit me, and I just blurted out, "Oh, Culinary Institute of America, not
Ah,
Central Intelligence Agency."
yes.
And he looked at me like I had two heads. Like, yeah, of course. What did you think? I was like, well, I mean, we are in, a stone's throw away. And so it's a great example of how when we use jargon, we can lead audiences into complete and utter confusion. So those are real issues. Two more would be sender-centricity. We make it about us. We start off with our, if it's a corporate presentation or even a sales presentation, here's our solution, here's some recent acquisitions, here's our mission, vision, and values, here's my biography, and so those are huge issues. But where it really leads us wrong is with the problem of unretellability. So what does that mean? Just think about any meeting where you've given a high stakes presentation. Is that meeting important? Yes. But is it the most important meeting? No, because no matter what you're presenting, it could be a strategy, it could be a funding proposal, it could be a sales meeting. That decision does not get made in that room, in that meeting, right? No, people can't do that. They'll go have a second meeting. So if you're presenting to the board and you're saying, "Hey, I want to get funding for this new strategy," they're going to say, "Okay, great." And then they're going to convene a second meeting where they're going to discuss that, right? Or in a sales conversation, that prospect or that customer, they're going to go have a second meeting. It could be with an executive team, it could be with a buying group, but that's where your solution gets discussed or your proposal gets discussed. And so here's the real issue. That's a decision-making meeting. If that first meeting had all those problems we just talked about, right? Too much information, sender-centric, confusing. What are the odds that the person or people in that first meeting are going to be able to retell your story in that second meeting? And it's just, they can't, right? And so you get two bad outcomes. One is, well, actually the best outcome would be they then invite you back to that second meeting because they're like, I'm not sure what that was about, but it seemed kind of interesting. So let's bring Mark back and he can present to us. The problem with that is you've just had the same meeting twice. And of course, it's really hard to get on people's calendars. So, if you're in sales, you were hoping to close that deal this month, right? Or this quarter. And now it's going to be next month, next quarter, maybe next year. So it just stretches things out. It wastes your time, right? It kills your productivity. And so it's just really destructive. Now, that, of course, is a better outcome than where they say, yeah, we already have a GS 1150 to do this. We don't really need, this company's or whoever Mark was presenting about. So we're fine, pass. So that's why it happens, right? You have all of these, what we would think of as brain violations. And so the answer, the solution in a nutshell is make it far simpler than you believe, make a story out of it, start with the audience, and then make sure that you have designed that presentation for all the perspectives of the people who are making the decision, right? And know that it may not be the perspective of the person who you're meeting with initially. So that's a long answer, but it's a big topic. But that's what it boils down to. Focus on the design first. There's some delivery issues too, but start with the design.
That. And basically, one thing I've learned is doing a lot of speaking engagements online, since we've really moved a lot virtual, is keeping it really simple,
Yeah.
by meaning like talking to the fourth grade level. Like we can overcomplicate it. And sometimes the people that we're talking to don't understand our business, which is why we're sharing our business or how we can help with them. And if we're using our technical jargon or our in business terminology that we're used to using, it doesn't mean that it's going to cross over into what they understand. And if they have to think too hard or go too far to figure it out, they're gone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We used to go through this long argument about how the human brain breaks down when it's overwhelmed with information. And then the pandemic came And we basically ran this experiment unintentionally. And the answer is Zoom fatigue, right? So if you just say, yeah, you ever experienced Zoom fatigue? Well, that's because you were overwhelmed with information and your brain just shut down. It couldn't process. So you actually gave one of the key best practices for how you start to cure this death by PowerPoint problem. And that is communicate it in a way that I don't know about a fourth grader, but at least a 10th grader could understand. And people completely discount how hard that is. They think they're dumbing it down. And the key is to be simple without being simplistic. It's a real skill to be able to describe something complicated in a simple way while still doing justice to that idea, to that thing that's complicated, to not misrepresenting it. And people continually underestimate the value of that skill. And perhaps like any skill, the difficulty of acquiring it, developing it, and mastering it. But it is absolutely essential to effective communication. So that's one. The other thing I'll add around simplifying is we have a rule called the rule of 1/3. And what you do is, if you're going to be presenting in an interactive meeting, right? So you're expecting back and forth, what you should do is design your content such that you can get through it in good detail in less than 1/3 of the total meeting time, right? So if you've got an hour-long meeting, you should design content for no more than 20 minutes, maybe even only 15. And I'll put it back to you, Heidi. Why do you suppose that's important? What's happening in that other 40, 45 minutes?
Well, interaction,
Yeah, yeah,
questions. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, think about it. So much of we design in presentations that are impossible for us to get through in an hour. And yet somehow we expect it's going to work out. Somehow we think, and everybody's had this feeling where, they're 8 slides into a 40-slide presentation and they're at the 40-minute mark and they start to panic. And that's a case where the design, they've completely cut themselves off at the knees. This is an own goal. This is a self-inflicted wound. And so instead, architect it so that you really don't have to worry about that. And you can have the discussion. You can assess how the room is thinking about this. You can ask the questions and go deep on the answers, which is incredibly important in, say, a sales conversation, right? You want to understand, hey, I've just talked about this problem, customer. Is this something you see? What does it look like in your organization? And so if you don't architect it in, the odds that you're going to be able to sort of make it up on the back end are just unrealistic. It's just fantasy. So if you can design that in, you're going to be far more effective. And I'll tell you, I think people have this, I said, people's instincts lead them in these crazy places. I think people almost have this fear of like, what's the worst that could happen? They seem to worry that the meeting would end early. I mean, like, when's that happen? When does, and if it does anybody complain? Oh, I see we've got 10 minutes left. Is anybody going to say, can you present us some more slides? No, actually, sometimes the discussion will take you over, but it's the discussion taking you over, not your sort of, fire hosing the, sort of the audience, right? And that's a completely different dynamic. When the audience is pulling you past the deadline, that's the place you want to be.
Absolutely, because they're engaged. And
Yes.
when you're hot, when you're in a position where you're fire hosing and getting all that information out in the last, you got 40 minutes of information, you're pushing into 15 minutes, everybody's stressed. The
Yeah.
audience is stressed, you're stressed, and the impact that you wanted to create is now gone. And I love that 15 minutes of content in an hour presentation, especially if you want that back and forth engagement, because it gets the audience, one, it pulls, in my opinion, or what I'm thinking about being in a room that's happening, and as you're talking and sharing that with us, is that my wall is coming down. I now want to engage more. I want to
Yes.
participate. And that 15 minutes of information is highly consumable versus an
Yes.
hour of information with really no room for Q&A or participation back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the things, again, our instincts get wrong is we don't understand that different communication channels have various strengths and weaknesses. And so when you look at a lot of presentations, you wonder, is this a presentation or a white paper? You know, another way you can start to tackle some of these challenges is you can send pre-reads. Now, if it's a sales meeting, the customer's not going to read in advance, so it's different. But, if you're presenting to a board, I mean, they are getting paid to listen to what you have to say, right? So, pre-reads are not only expected, but encouraged, right? They're vital. And that's true for a lot of management meetings, quarterly business updates, monthly reviews. You can send the information in advance, and then you can have a discussion about it, and so that way, that's another way. But again, it's we don't get a choice. We don't get to decide how the brain is going to process information. The brain gets overwhelmed very easily in an oral environment, and in a virtual environment, our bandwidth just plummets even faster because, right, we're already fried, right? We're coming in from however many back-to-back online meetings we've had, and we have all these coming up next. So we already are not working with very many mental pennies. And so, woe betide the speaker who makes these fantastical assumptions that their audience is just completely fresh and is going to be taking vast notes and has this mental capacity to absorb all the detail on, this chart. It's not accurate. So you have to really turn it around. You have to work from reality. You have to meet the audience where they are. And that's true in terms of their bandwidth. It's also true in terms of the content. I mentioned story earlier, and we should definitely talk about that aspect of it too. Simplification is very important. But again, if you don't have a story, simple helps, but it's, you're still not solving completely this problem of being an effective communicator.
Yeah, and I don't know if this has, I'm guessing the springboards or connects with storytelling, but let me know if I'm wrong. One of your biggest ideas is retellability, which is that a message has to survive after the speaker leaves the room. And we touched on that earlier. So why is it so important in both sales conversations and executive presentations?
Do you, when you were a kid, you ever play that game Telephone?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So what do you remember about it? What's the game?
I remember, well, one person starts and whispers a message into somebody's ear, and it goes down as many people as it is, could be 5, could be 10. And by the time it gets to the last person, the message is not the same as it was from the original person that gave the message.
Yes.
It changes. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what's happening in sales pursuits. That's what's happening in internal meetings, conversations. That's the problem, right? That is what we would call unretellability, right? So, you have a meeting, you're discussing a new policy, or you're presenting to your team, your organization on a new policy, or maybe it's a new strategy, a new direction, whatever it is. And everybody's nodding, yes, yeah, we get it, boss, we get it. And then people walk out of that room, they're standing around the water cooler or on Slack, the virtual water cooler. They're saying, what was that about? Did you follow that? I'm saying, no, I'm counting on there to be a lot of there'll be some follow-up memos, I'm sure. People didn't understand. They might have nodded yes, but they've lost it, right? And that is a huge, huge problem in business, in sales. In sales is where things get measured. So we talk a lot about sales conversations because it just gets measured more, but it's a problem in all forms of business, all the different areas. But you think about in sales, if a message isn't retellable and it's a complicated sale, right? So we work with a lot of companies that have complex solutions, companies like Pfizer, Merck and pharmaceutical, Cisco Systems, Amazon, Disney, Rockwell Automation. So these are world-class companies, right? World-class solutions. And yet they're also very complicated. And so when they go meet with customers and they're talking about, the AI-enabled workplace, or they're talking about logistics, or they're talking about this particular treatment, and they don't have a lot of time to get this message across, the odds that it's going to land with the customer, given the problems we just talked about, just very low. And so the way that hurts you is longer sales cycles, lower win rates, lower productivity for your salespeople because they're having the same meeting multiple times. So unretellability is just a complete killer. So the solution is retellability, right? And so how do you get that? Well, you need to build the message for the first meeting, but also for the second meeting. For the person in the first meeting or people to be able to take your message and retell it. And you can think about that on the corporate side as well. You want the virus of your message to spread organically through the organization. And so story becomes a very important part of that. So simplifying is very important. Audience centricity is very important. Retellability is very important. And the way to get that is through story.
So let's talk about story. What do you mean by story? And what if somebody's listening and going, I don't even know how to share a story, or I don't have a story to share?
So everybody, your solution, if you're talking about selling a solution, you absolutely have a story. The way that we teach this at its concrete or most basic form is that, first of all, the human brain organizes or codifies information into stories. So, and we all know this to be true instinctively. If somebody were to ask you, hey, what was that? What was the game? What was that baseball game about, that you went to yesterday? You're not going to regurgitate a bunch of fancy stats, right? So instead, you're going to say something like, wow, well, the Nationals, so I'm a Washington Nationals fan. The Washington Nationals, they jumped to they went behind by 2 runs, then they came from behind and they built a cushion of 4 runs that their terrible bullpen couldn't blow. And so they hung on and they won 6-4, right? So we do that with plays, movies. We boil it down. We reduce it like a stock to a few movements or chapters. We instinctively do this. This is the way the brain codifies information, the way it retains information, the way it remembers information, the way it retells information. And so what we want to do when we're designing a presentation is we want to just align to that reality. And we want to create a story that is going to resonate with the audience. So when we say nobody has a story, everybody has a story. And especially if you think about a product, for example, that you're selling. There's a story of, okay, or let's say a solution. This is a really kind of a dumb, obvious question, and yet it doesn't show up in these presentations often. What must you have in order to have a solution? What is the solution? What do you have to have a solution?
You have to have a problem.
Yes, exactly, right? But so often, right, when we talk about sender-centricity, we come in and we talk about our solution right off the bat. And we just let the customer try to figure out, okay, why should I care about this solution? So we teach we call it a 3-movement symphony. And I'll explain it in sales presentations, and I'll explain it to you in general business. So what does that look like for sales? You start and you say, you have a problem and it's bigger and more serious than you realize. That's the first movement. Second movement, we know how to solve that problem and we solve it better than anyone else. And then the third movement is, here's what it would look like to work together and here are our next steps. If you can boil your solution story into those 3 movements, right? So you have a problem, it's bigger and more serious than you realize. So first of all, I'm going to come in, I'm going to start talking about you, the customer. Here's a problem that we see. Here's a business challenge or a goal that you're trying to face or a goal that you have, a gap, right? Some need, some objective. And it's a huge issue, right? You have to hit this goal or this problem is costing you, and it's costing you in terms of lost customers, frustrations, cycle time, whatever it might be. So you know what? You should not keep with the status quo. Most people don't want to change unless the pain of change is less than the pain of the status quo, right? So start with a problem, and the audience is going to say, wow, you actually spent some time thinking about my business. It's amazing the goodwill you will win. Even if you don't have the right problem, the goodwill you will win by starting by talking about your audience or in a sales presentation, your customer. And then the second movement is we know how to solve that problem. So here's the solution, and we can solve it better than anyone else. So you don't want to sort of, lead a trail of breadcrumbs to your competitor's door in sales, right? So you want to speak to, okay, what is it about your solution that is unique and important to the customer? And by the way, that's not features and benefits. That's actual things that the customer would care about, right? So sometimes the problem could be, you know what? This thing, I'm speaking as a customer, this thing is keeping me from getting home on Tuesday nights to go to my son's softball or baseball game, right? It's like, okay, well, we can help you get to that baseball game. That could be the solution, right? It's not necessarily the features and benefits, but those two together, are your value proposition, right? You have a problem, it's bigger than you realize, and here's how you solve it, and we can solve it better than anyone else. That's a value proposition. And the third part of it is, okay, well, how do we move forward? So what are our next steps? Because oftentimes people think, oh, well, if I present the solution, that's the only question that people would have, right? And no, of course not. They're like, okay, great, it solves the problem, but what's this going to cost? Is it like $1 billion, or how hard is this to implement, or does this work with my current technology? So they're going to have a number of questions. And so that's the third movement. It's let's talk about what it would look like in your organization. And then let's talk about immediate next steps. Like, how do you get started? So that's the sales side. If you can take your existing PowerPoint presentation, which if it's like 100 slides, which we've just talked about, that's terrible. But the silver lining is those three movements are probably in there somewhere, right? You just have to pull them out. And then here's another trick or tool that we share with our clients. All that other stuff, put into an appendix so that you have it as a reference, but it's not there to blow up the body of your presentation. So if somebody says, oh, this is great, but is it ISO 9001 certified? You say, well, yes, it is. Let's turn to page 38 of the appendix. And so now you still look smart, but you're not taking people through a 100-slide deck, right? Yeah. So that's on the sales side. Just quickly on the general business side, what does that look like? Well, you have a problem. It's bigger and more serious than you think it is. Second movement, here's how to solve that problem and solve it better than the alternatives. So oftentimes internally, right, people want to know, the audience wants to know, okay, well, that does seem to solve it, but what about this or this? What about this approach? So you want to show that you did the homework and that you considered all the approaches and that this was the superior, the best way forward for that. And then the third, again, very similar to the sales version, here's what it would look like to make that happen, and here are our next steps, right? So here's what this would look like in our organization. Here's what we need to solve, and here are our next steps for moving forward with this. So that's it. Really simple and really hard, I think, for a lot of people, but boil it down to those three movements, and you are way ahead of the game compared to what other people or the typical PowerPoint, 100-slide presentation.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I'm so glad that you shared those three movements, because that is going to can change the game for many people. Like you said, as long as you do those three, you're going to be ahead of where you would be without them. And I like that you said the benefits are not the features. It's not what you're getting. And many people, including me, will sit there and go, well, you're going to get this and this and this and this. And actually, that can sometimes ruin the sale. It can actually shut it down, because they're like, I don't have time for all of that. When am I going to be able to do all of that or get all of that? I don't want all of that. I just want you to solve my problem. So we can show them the path to solving the problem. We only need to know all the things that they're getting. They don't need to necessarily need to know all that. They just need to know that you can solve it, and this is what it's going to look like on the other side of that solution.
Yeah, great point. I think when people put forward features and benefits, they assume that the customer is going to translate that into what is valuable for themselves, for the customer, or the audience if it's a business presentation. And that's a dangerous assumption to make. We like to say that oftentimes what customers are buying are not what you are selling. And so what you need to do is you need to sell what they're buying. And I'll tell you an example of this. We were working with a client that made, I don't need to get into the technical details, but something called a drive, and it powers something called an asset. And an example of that would be like a little motor that sits on one of these giant pieces of mining equipment. Have you ever seen this equipment at like big mines, like giant dump trucks? Do you ever see these, or excavators? They're like the people, like they're like 3-story buildings, and you like climb a ladder to get into the cab to drive one of these things. You ever seen these? I mean, they're huge. They're enormous. They are worth an incredible amount of money. And typically mining companies don't buy them because it costs so much. Instead, they lease them. And so these motors, these drives, are very important to keeping this asset, like a big dump truck, running. And if the motor breaks, then the dump truck doesn't work. And so we're talking with a client about this motor, these drives, And we said, well, so why do customers buy these from you? And they're like, well, I silence. I'm like, well, okay, it's higher quality. They're like, no, I mean a little bit. Okay, so is it cheaper than the competition? No, actually, we charge about 20% more. And they're all kind of sheepishly looking at each other, wondering, do we need to let that out? I mean, if people find out, I was like, okay, interesting. So there must be some reason these people are buying these. And eventually it came out that our client has offices within 30 minutes of all of the major mining operations. And I think this was in Canada. And more so, if the drive broke, the end customer knew that somebody from our client company would be out there on site within 30 minutes with a drive and would fix it. And I was like, oh, interesting. Now we're getting somewhere. Now, why is that important? Well, because literally they can see money draining out of the bank account from this asset that they've leased. And if it's sitting there, they're not getting any money back. So the less that equipment is down, that's critical. And so our ability to make sure that this part of it will never be a factor or only very limited be a factor in that asset's utilization uptime is incredibly important to those people, to that client. I was like, wow, that's interesting. And so we started looking through their collateral. I was like, well, where is this? And we're like, it was nowhere in there. So it was right in front of their face, right? That this is what the customer is buying. You're selling a drive. What they're buying is asset reliability. And at that point, we redesigned the sales message they had, and it boiled down to you're not buying a drive, you're buying a company. And if you just buy a drive because it's the cheapest one out there, you're going to be penny wise and pound foolish, right? So that was the problem, right? Drives that break down. And so we refashioned the whole message around that. So it's hugely valuable to understand that, to understand what is it that the customer is buying, or what is it that the audience mentally is buying, or the audience really gets out of this. You could call this whiffum, what's in it for me. But it's a great point. It's hugely important to take that customer audience centric view.
And you allowed them to get clear with that because you dove deeper. You didn't stay at surface level. You're like, okay, you kept asking questions and you drilled down to that answer. They didn't know it off the top of their head. And many companies don't. They don't
Yes.
know the main pain point. They know they stay surface level and it's hurting their business. And like you said, by knowing that, because you mentioned they charge 20% more. Now, when you're making that clear to businesses, one, their revenue is going to go up because they're going to get more clients, but they also don't even balk at the price there because they know if they go cheaper, they're actually going to lose more money by going that route because when it breaks down, could go days, could go weeks without that being fixed. Where with this company, it's a 30-minute fix or 30
Exactly.
minutes till you're getting out there. And they're like, I would rather invest in that because I know it's going to happen to me, right? These companies that are
Yes.
using these products, they're like, I know it's going to go down. And when it
Exactly. And that's
does,
another
I
thing you
need to be
prove.
able to get you out here ASAP. Yeah.
Brilliant. Exactly. And when we went through this exercise, right, which of course they saw their revenues improve as a result of this, but the question was maybe you're not paying enough or charging enough rather, right? I mean, when you look at the value that way, I don't think I have it handy. Actually, I do. And I know that some people will just be listening in, but here's a message for a measurement device that we helped a client with. Now, this measurement device, it costs $500,000 and it replaces traditional measurement devices on production lines that cost a few $100s. So why on earth would somebody ever pay $500,000 for a device that replaces devices that cost a few $100s? Well, obviously, on the basis of that logic, they never would. That would be dumb. But if you're making jet blades or jet fan blades for jet engines, or if you're making hip implants, quality is really important. Getting it right is really important. Getting it wrong has a lot of really bad outcomes. And a lot of these measurement devices, the traditional ones, date back to their 19th century technology. They're just not accurate enough like this machine is, right? So you have to figure out what your audience needs or what your customer is buying and then sell them that. And far too often, when we take this sender-centric view, it's features and benefits, here's the list, and we leave it to the customer to try to figure out why they should care. And they don't have time to do that.
No, they don't. Mark, I want to ask you some questions. I know we're running out of time, so I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to make sure I get these in, and then I want to ask you to share how people can connect with you because I'm loving this conversation, which I know, which means I know other people are too, because everybody needs to really get good at presenting. Because presentations isn't just you speaking on a stage. So if you're not a stage speaker, that's okay. You're presenting at some point or another, whether it's presenting yourself at a networking meeting, but really getting clear.
Yes.
Mark did a great job of sending me a bio that was really to the point, concise, and then we could go deeper. And you want to get people engaged. If you talk more than, say, 30 seconds about who you are and what you do, they're gone. Because we want to quickly turn it onto the focus of them and asking them questions. So presenting in an AI world, Mark, we're here, we're in it. AI is here to stay. So now AI can help generate presentations, talking points, and scripts in sometimes seconds. So how should business leaders be using AI to improve their presentations without losing authenticity, credibility, and their own voice?
Boy, that's a great question. I would say most people, I think about it the wrong way, the opposite way. And what I mean by that is the story of technology tends to be it helps with things from the bottom up. In other words, the things that could be automated or the less hard tasks. And the funny thing about AI is it presents itself as being good at replacing us as writers, as creators. And I think we'll end up just in the same box we were before. You'll end up sounding like everybody else. You can't always trust what it has to say. So be very careful about using it for creative, for your voice, for what you want to say, because it's just mining information that's available out there. And so it gives you the illusion of creativity without actual creativity. So first thing I would say, first place to start is be very clear about what your insights are, what your ideas are, what story you have to tell. And then I think where it gets very, very useful and helpful, like I said, is from the bottom up. First, if you have a trained model, and we've trained a few different models that can provide quality checks, they can say, okay, hey, listen, I built this story. Is it fitting into that 3-movement symphony, or is it following, like, is it simple enough? So you can like put it in and say, okay, it's for an hour-long meeting. I need to be talking no more than 20. Is this the right level of quantity, right? So it's very good as a quality checker. It's very good as sort of playing your editing role as well. So you create something and then you send it through and you can say, okay, well, how can I improve this? What did I miss? That sort of thing. The other place is just on the back end, the presentation software, the creation software like Gamma, those Google's Nano Banana. I don't think they're quite there yet, but they're getting really, really close. Typically, creating slides is very labor intensive, right? That's where most of the time is. And so if just stay on top of that, and it's getting pretty good at first efforts, so to speak, right? And especially if you give it brand guidelines or an existing deck that has sort of the material already, and you're asking to revise it, say, here's my revised outline. Can you take from this deck what's valuable? So that's the way that we use AI. But the big idea here is do not use it to write your presentations, because you're not going to have an original idea. You're going to sound like everybody else. And what's the point of being in business, right? If you're just sort of getting your ideas from a machine.
Yeah. And this ties back to story. Your story is what's going to differentiate you too, because in business, we do have competitors. We might do the same thing, but the reason we're doing it, our why is different. Our story of how we got started is different. Our case studies and the customers that we work with and those testimonials are different. And that's what can help set you apart. So bringing that storytelling back in, which Mark, drilled home with us, is really key, and something that if you're using AI, you want to make sure you're sharing that with it, because so it can incorporate that into your presentations while it's helping you edit. And at the same time, do what Mark's been doing. He's been doing it here. He showed how with that customer who made this piece for the drive for that product, those big machines, he kept asking questions. So when you're using AI, keep asking it questions. Keep checking. Are you sure? Is this the way we're supposed to go? Because I'm thinking. And you can also tell it, I want a no fluff coach. You tell me directly what I should be doing or not doing, and then but always go back to making it your own. Always go because it will kiss your butt, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
AI likes to appease you and people please. So you need to
Yes.
actually tell it like, don't people please me. Tell me straight up if this is wrong or this has been ineffective other places, then let me know.
Yeah.
But really talking into that story and then drilling down with AI and constantly asking it questions will help hone it in. But at the end of the day, it still has to be yours.
Exactly. It's a tool, and if you treat it as a tool, it will serve you well, but it requires a skill set to be able to use it well. And you've just described one, which is called prompt engineering, but I think just innate curiosity, starting with your own ideas and then using it to do research or to support that, that's the way to go. Don't ask it to come up with your own presentation because, like I said, you're just going to end up sounding like everybody else. The other thing you mentioned is coaching. We didn't really have a chance to get into that, but the use of AI coaches is an amazing new frontier. That's garbage in, garbage out. Most of them are very generic, so you need a brain in them.
Mhm.
You need to train them in a methodology. But if you do that and then you create scenarios that replicate actual real world conversations, that's game changing.
Wow.
That's like creepy how good those are. I've had my 3 sleepless nights over some of the questions that AI generated personas have asked me and simulated customer discussions. It's wild.
Wow, that's incredible. I wish we had another hour to dive into that. So can you, real quick, can we talk about Oratium's growth? Can you share with us some, as far as visibility and marketing wise go, because our listeners are founders, CEOs, people in the business space who are in different growth phases. So it's always nice to hear what's working for other people, other businesses who are growing, and also what hasn't worked. So can you share with us those two sides of the coin as
Sure.
far as like what y'all do? How are people finding you? How are you making sure that you're getting in front of them?
Sure. I think things like cold emailing and cold calling, those don't work for us. I'm not sure that they work for many people, even though now we're getting a lot more AI emails that seem to know a lot about us, or at least our LinkedIn profiles. We have a saying internally, our work is our calling card. So the first and the most important is to do great work, and that builds references. It builds additional business within clients, right? So without great work, it gets a lot harder. So that's the first thing. I know that sounds not very sort of sexy, but we work with a lot of big companies. We work with small and mid-sized companies, but those people, the word spreads, they change companies, they change jobs. So that's the first thing. That's kind of our first pillar. In terms of more sort of front of the funnel marketing, we do a lot of keynotes. We go to a lot of conferences and present. Typically what we're presenting is a version of our training though. So like I talked about 3 movement symphonies, we present that, so hopefully people are getting value in the moment. And that extends to the other places where we spend a lot of time, which is on LinkedIn and website with just thought content, ideas, thought leadership. So kind of a variant of our work being our calling card. We feel that in order to get somebody to spend attention or time with us, there should be value that we're providing to them. So our first thought is always of the audience and what is it that the audience would find valuable and need to hear. And then we create content that does that, be it webinars, posts, calculators, what have you. But it's all driven by hopefully we're going to help people see what this problem is, how you solve it, and they'll find us, that trail of breadcrumbs, to help them solve it. But our focus is really first on, I think in the social media channels, just really on value of content and ideas. We're an ideas company, so we're going to lead with our ideas. So nothing fancy, lots of hard work. I sure wish cold calling and emailing works. If somebody's got the magic formula for that, we haven't found it yet. I'll put it to you that way.
Yeah. So, if I could give you a magic wand, Mark, and you can wave it over one challenge or issue you're experiencing right now with your business growth, and you can go wave it over it and go poof, and it just disappears. What
Yeah.
would it be and why?
I think lead generation on the front end, or at least
Mhm.
awareness. There's just so much noise out there. It's
Yeah.
so hard to break through. Now, we're not looking to hit the top of the Billboard charts. There's another quote we like to use that's said about the old band, the Velvet Underground, which is that only 800 people bought their albums, but every single one of them formed a rock band. You know, we want to change the world one bad presentation at a time, right? That's what we want. We want change. And so if we could get people who could find us who are genuinely committed to just putting an end to these terrible presentations, that would be my magic wand. And that would be why, because, we only spend so much time on this planet. And so you like to think that what you do has some impact and value. And that's what we're in this for, is to
Yeah.
actually help people communicate better, to get what they're seeking out of those communications. And so if I can wave a magic wand, that's what I do. Help those people find us more easily.
Amazing. So, Mark, share with us how we can connect with you, reach out to you, and learn more about you and Oratium.
Yeah, two places. So oratium.com, oratium.com, and then our LinkedIn profile. We're very active on LinkedIn. We're posting regularly, a couple of times a week, plus a few other posts, but those are all focused on helping everybody who would be listening or watching this conversation solve or cure death by PowerPoint. So I promise you, you will get value from those. And in fact, the 3-movement symphony, as an example, we just posted on that a couple of months ago. So all of that's in there. We're trying to open the cupboard, so to speak, to help our clients or would-be clients.
I love it. So for those of you listening, if you're watching us on YouTube, Mark and I say hello and thank you. If you know somebody that would benefit from this conversation, please share this episode with them. And I know you do, because everybody can benefit from this conversation. There's not one business around that can't do better or, wants to get better at presenting to close more sales and clients and grow their revenue. If you are listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, thank you. If you are so inclined to leave a review, we would love it, preferably 5 stars. That helps the platform see that this interview is getting some action, and they will help push out Mark and Oratium to more people. And if you know of anybody that would benefit from hearing this conversation, please share it with them. We'd be extremely grateful. Go to oratium.com, Oratium, Oratium. Go connect with Mark. We have all of his information inside the show notes as well. So if you're driving, don't worry, we got you. And Mark, before I let you go, is there anything that you'd like to share or say that we didn't talk about or I didn't ask you or touch on today?
One thing, everyone out there who thinks, well, I'm not a great presenter, I'm not gifted at that, just know that everybody can be an incredibly effective presenter, and know that the rules, as you've been led to believe, are not the right rules for great presentations. In fact, some of the most gifted presenters or most effective presenters, their delivery is not at all what you would expect. It's all in the design. If you have a great story to tell, the audience will listen and they will act. It's not about delivery. It's just about getting out of your own way, but focusing on the design. So anybody who out there thinks they're not a good presenter, they're a bad presenter, can't be a good presenter, I will argue with you to the end of time. You can become a very good presenter. It's nothing to do with probably what you've been taught or told.
I love that, because I don't know one presenter that started off as a great presenter. Any great presenter learned how to do it. It's a skill that you can learn, and there's tools that can help you along the way. And design, I've never heard it put that way, which kind of takes that barrier down to feeling stressed out about it. It's like, oh, if I just design it a certain way.
Yes.
And also understand your audience wants to support you. They want to love you. They don't go in like, I hope this person does a horrible job. They're there to cheer you on and support you. So when you go in knowing that, have some fun. Just be you, let your personality shine through, and don't forget the story. And reach out to Mark. So if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know what to do, or I'm feeling stuck, reach out to Mark. They'll support you. They'll get you going in creating that fantastic presentation and let you shine in your authentic self to get the results that you want to get. So thank you, Mark, for being here. This has been amazing. I love this conversation. And I'm excited that we got to have it today. So thank you for your time. Thank you all for listening. Oh, for those of you who are joining us again, we are having an event coming up, which is if you are looking to grow your visibility and, you've done the SEO and you've been searchable on Google and you're like throwing spaghetti at the wall going, all the things that I used to do aren't working, like cold email or outreach or social media. We are hosting an event all around becoming searchable and findable through AEO, which is something that every business should be looking at. So you can, to learn more about the date of our next event and how you can join us for free, go to becomeairecommended.com. Go to becomeairecommended.com and learn more. If you have any questions, reach out, and I look forward to seeing you there. Mark, thank you again for being here. For those
You're
of you
welcome,
listening, go
Heidi.
to Oratium.com to learn more about Mark and what they can do to help you in your presentations. Go connect with them on LinkedIn. And I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of the Business Growth Spotlights.